It's the middle of the night, somewhere on the frozen edge of the Roman Empire. A candle burns low inside a leather tent. Outside, soldiers cough, the same cough that has already killed thousands. Inside, an old man sits alone, wrapped in a plain wool cloak, writing by candlelight. He is not writing a decree. He is not writing to his generals. He is writing to himself. His name is Marcus Aurelius. He is the most powerful man alive, emperor of Rome, ruler of over 50 million people. And tonight, for the 100th night in a row, he is trying to convince himself to keep going. 20 years earlier, none of this seemed possible. Marcus never wanted to be emperor. He was a quiet student of philosophy, more interested in logic and ethics than politics or war. But when his adoptive father, Emperor Antoninus Pius, died in the year 1600, the throne fell to him anyway, and almost immediately the world seemed to fall apart. First came a war in the east, dragging Roman legions into years of brutal fighting. Then the soldiers came home, carrying something far worse than victory. Historians would later call it the Antonine Plague. It swept through the empire for over a decade, killing an estimated 5 million people. Entire towns were emptied. Even inside the palace, no one was safe. While the plague burned through Rome, another threat rose on the northern border. Germanic tribes crossed the frozen Danube River in numbers no one had seen before. Marcus, the philosopher who never wanted a sword, was forced to leave Rome and spend most of the rest of his life commanding armies in freezing frontier camps, far from home. And the losses kept coming. Of the many children he and his wife Faustina had, most did not survive childhood, a grief he carried through every campaign. His co-emperor and old friend died suddenly, possibly of the very plague they were fighting. Then came the cruelest blow of all. A general Marcus trusted completely, a man named Avidius Cassius, heard a false rumor that Marcus had died and declared himself the new emperor. Marcus had to prepare to march against a man he once called a friend. By every measure, Marcus Aurelius was surrounded. Disease outside his tent, war outside his empire, grief inside his own family, and betrayal from the one place he thought he could trust. Most men in his position would have broken. Marcus almost did. But instead of collapsing, he picked up a pen. Each night, after the maps were rolled up and the reports were read, alone in his tent, Marcus began writing to himself. Not for his people, not for history. He never intended for anyone to ever read these pages. He was using them the way we might use a private journal today, to hold himself together. In these pages, he kept returning to one idea over and over, in different words, from different angles, as if trying to make it stick. The idea was simple, but almost impossible to actually live by. You do not control what happens to you. You only control how you respond to it. The plague was not his to control. The war was not his to control. Even Cassius's betrayal was not his to control. But his own mind, his judgment, his reaction, his next decision, that was his, completely, every single time. So he trained himself, one page at a time, to stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is the right way to act right now in this exact moment? There's a story historians point to that shows exactly how far he pushed this. When Cassius was finally killed by his own soldiers before the two armies ever met in battle, Marcus reportedly felt no joy, only sadness that he'd been denied the chance to show his old friend mercy. A man betrayed by someone he trusted, and his instinct was still to look for the more forgiving response. That is not something you're born with. That is something you build, one honest page at a time, on the worst nights of your life. Those private pages he wrote in the dark, never meant to be published, never meant to be read by anyone but himself, would eventually be discovered, copied, and passed down. Today we call them meditations. Nearly 2,000 years later, people are still reading the private notebook of a man who was simply trying to survive one more night. Which brings us back to that tent, that candle, that old man writing in the middle of the night. That night wasn't just one night. It was thousands of nights repeated for nearly 20 years, on campaign after campaign, loss after loss. Marcus Aurelius would never see Rome as a peaceful ruler again. He would die exactly the way he lived those last 2 decades, in a military camp on the frontier, still working, in the year 1880. He didn't write himself out of the plague. He didn't write himself out of the war. He didn't write himself out of grief. What he wrote himself into was peace, the only kind that was ever actually available to him, not the absence of hardship, the ability to remain steady inside it. And here's the part that matters for you, right now, tonight. You don't need an empire falling apart to use this. You don't need a war on 2 fronts. The exact same tool that kept the most powerful man in the world from breaking is sitting in your phone or in a $5 notebook. Tonight, try this. Before you go to sleep, write down one thing today that you couldn't control, and one thing you did control, your reaction to it. That's it. That's the whole practice Marcus used to survive an empire collapsing around him. Do it for 7 nights and notice what changes. If this story moved you, there's another one almost as unbelievable. A woman who was rejected 12 times, broke, and raising a child alone, right before she wrote one of the best-selling book series in history. That story is coming this week. Subscribe for your next reminder that comebacks are possible.